And finally, Israel has a government. Months of elections and political deadlock have led to an unprecedented power-sharing cabinet. Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz will both lead it over the next 3 years, but with different agendas, can these two men actually work together? This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. He is seen as an unparalleled political survivor, and once again, he got what he wanted. Benjamin Netanyahu will lead a fifth government in Israel, but for the first time, he will not be governing alone. Netanyahu will be rotating the Prime Minister's job with his former rival Benny Gantz, 18 months each. That power-sharing deal was agreed last month, ending a year of political deadlock in which 3 inconclusive elections were held. The unity government, now sworn in, it is a rarity in Israel's politics. Gantz says it's needed to tackle the coronavirus during, quote, not normal times. But what about Prime Minister Netanyahu and his own battles? He is facing a corruption trial this month, the first sitting Prime Minister to face such proceedings. And he's also pressing ahead with a controversial plan to annex part of the occupied West Bank.
It's time to apply Israeli law and write a glorious chapter in the history of Zionism. This step doesn't delay peace, it brings it closer, because peace must be based on the truth, and the truth is that there are hundreds of thousands of settlers in Judea and Samaria, our brothers and sisters. They will stay there as part of any permanent peace deal.
We decided to take national responsibility, especially at this time. Israel needs a national government that represents broad sections of the country. After more than 10 years, the era of government by one half of the nation is over. We are here to represent those who felt they had no voice in leading this country.
So, 2 men, both who would be Prime Minister and both who will, theoretically, get the chance. But as we know, even just 1 year in Israeli politics is a long time, let alone more than 3. Here is Harry Fawcett in West Jerusalem to set the scene for us.
Well, after more than 500 days of caretaker administration and political crisis, during which time we've seen 3 inconclusive elections, we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu go from a suspect in 3 corruption cases to being indicted, with his trial due to start next Sunday. At last, Israel saw a government sworn in. But what kind of a government will it be? It'll be the biggest in Israel's history, swelling to 36 ministries, a way of trying to satisfy demands on both sides, with the 2 men at the top of each side, Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's former rival, and Netanyahu, both sworn in immediately as alternate Prime Minister and Prime Minister. Netanyahu will go first for 18 months and then Gantz for the last 18 months. But even as Netanyahu hands over power, if he does, he will still retain the position of alternate Prime Minister, something seen as important as he tries to fight off that corruption case. As for what they said as they tried to sell this to the wider Israeli public at a session at the Knesset, during which there was often a good deal of shouted opposition from the floor, Netanyahu talked about unity, he talked about standing shoulder to shoulder against the coronavirus crisis. He also talked about his plans for annexation, saying that it would write a glorious new chapter in the history of Zionism, despite the fact that Gantz himself is opposed to any unilateral action, wants to see more international consensus. And the message from the US State Department in recent days seems to have been that they want to see slower progress on that front from this new Israeli government as well. As far as Gantz is concerned, it was pretty extraordinary to see someone who just weeks ago was talking about Netanyahu pouring poison into Israeli democracy, making his entire political career about ousting someone under corruption charges from a position of power in Israel, suddenly to praising him for having made an important decision in taking his party into this unity government. The leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, say both men say worse things about each other in private than he could ever say in the Knesset, and predicted that there would be more dysfunction as this government continues. But for now, Israel does have a government in office at last. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story, West Jerusalem.
There's all the background. Let's introduce you to our panel today, starting in West Jerusalem with Mitchell Barak, CEO of the political consultancy group Kivon Global Research. Then in Tel Aviv, Dalia Scheindlin, columnist at Plus 972 magazine. a political opinion analyst and a political strategist. And back in West Jerusalem as well is Akiva Elder, former columnist at Al Monitor and a contributor to the Haaretz newspaper. Welcome to all three of you. I wonder if we might start, a little unconventionally, with looking back. Mitchell Barak, the outgoing government of Prime Minister Netanyahu was actually, I think, the longest-serving government there has been in Israel, which is quite an achievement, it has to be said. I wonder, though, what was actually achieved? What did Prime Minister Netanyahu get done in the last 5 years? Because I would suggest, actually, maybe not a lot.
Well, he managed to stay in power, which is, one of his main goals and one of the things that keeps him going. Certainly, he was blessed in a particular way. I would say that cynically, he was blessed with the coronavirus epidemic, which kind of took the focus off of Israeli politics and of Gantz's, efforts to unseat him. And in the beginning, it was going really well, meaning, he was able to be elected speaker. He was moving some legislation forward. I mean, he almost had a leg up on him. But he was able to use that coronavirus thing. Netanyahu, there's always going to be some kind of security issue that he's defending, the Iranian issue. I think if you want to look at, achievements, and again, this was like happenstance, if you will, the fact that President Trump came in the last, 3-4 years has been really helpful. And he was able to cement that relationship with the United States and really achieve things that no one ever thought would take place, including moving the embassy to Jerusalem, including having the Iranian nuclear deal canceled, including recognizing the Golan Heights. And he seems almost poised, as was shown in the program, to extend Israeli law, or what was called annexing the West Bank. So that's really, I think, his achievement. He also has achievements. You can criticize him a lot, but within the international arena, he is a well-respected leader, and he is, besides that he has an excellent relationship with Trump, he also has an excellent relationship with Vladimir Putin, and he is probably the only person in the world that has an excellent relationship with both of them.
Both, yeah. Dalia, let me bring you into the conversation, because what we've done already between Mitchell and I, we've just talked about Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that's generally the way the conversation always goes. I'm also just interested to get a little bit of a picture of life in Israel for people there, because, well, we're a global news channel. We take a regional and a global look at things. I'm actually interested in, well, what life has been like for Israeli people in the last 5 years and what they can expect going forward.
Well, this is a good question because it does tie into what Mitchell did to try to summarize Netanyahu's achievements. One of the things that I think that many Israelis do give Netanyahu credit for is that they view the last 5 years as a phase where security was not as big of an issue as it sometimes is, which is odd because there were actually 2 wars with Gaza between Israel and Hamas in Gaza during that time. But somehow Israelis have been convinced that that's a manageable situation. There was even a wave of stabbing attacks, but it's as if Israelis had such low expectations that is considered somehow a credit to Netanyahu's term. And of course, I'm going back before the last 5 years because he's been in office since 2009. So there has been a semblance of normalcy because there hasn't been, major war since 2014. And economic life is strong on the macroeconomic indicators, but of course, people have a heavy economic burden. What I do think has been going on over the last 5 years that also plays into Netanyahu's so-called achievements, you might say, is the fact that there has been a very aggressive political rhetoric that has become very normal in Israeli society. The public doesn't like it, but the public does participate in it on all sides. And that rhetoric involves very significant both legislative and rhetorical attacks on Israel's minority, the Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, on left-wing or dissenting opinions. That has become so routine that it kind of set the stage for one of the other major aspects over the last few years, which is a sort of ongoing undermining of the legitimacy of the judiciary and the Supreme Court. And this is something that was a little bit under the surface for part of the last 5 years, but really burst out into the open over the last year, especially the closer we got to indictment of Netanyahu for those corruption cases that are, of course, the trial is supposed to start next week. And now I think that issue is reaching a peak, has been reaching a peak ever since the last elections. We had a constitutional crisis. We're seeing very vicious attacks on the Attorney General, who has recently submitted complaints to the police for threats on his life. That has become a feature of Israeli society and is dividing the public just as much as some of the other issues you mentioned, such as annexation, which has been much more normalized, and the other things we'll talk about.
Yes,
and I think we're going to see increasing debate over that issue in the coming months.
All right. And so the question is, and this question's going to Akiva Elder in West Jerusalem, welcome to you. What, if anything, is going to change? This is a different sort of government that is coming into power. There's no two ways about it. I have read commentary saying that Netanyahu is theoretically going to be on a shorter leash now. Do you see the Prime Minister changing his style at all because of the makeup of this government?
Well, this question will have to be asked again 18 months from today, because as he said today, he gave a specific date in November where he will turn over the crown, and it's a crown because Bibi is becoming the king of Israel. The longest, he broke all the records, even of Ben-Gurion, the founder of Israel. If he will hand it over to Gantz, this will be a big surprise, and I think that this will help him to save what's left of his credibility. But I think that the most important thing is going to happen to him in the United States. If Trump will have to hand over the White House to pack his belongings, and there will be a Democratic Congress, Senate, and President, then Netanyahu will have to change. Because as Mitchell mentioned, he got many free lunches. And I don't think that this is going to happen under a Democratic administration. So he put all his chips on the Republicans against the Jewish community, against the American liberal community, against Europe. Well, he got the support of Putin, of the Hungarian democracy, Orban, and then India, of course, but he lost the Arab League, the Arab Peace Initiative. He missed the opportunities to complete or to see if there is any possibility to reach a two-state solution. I think that he is leading Israel to an apartheid. Yeah. Now, is he going to change? Not with this kind of government, not with a partner like Gantz, who has got a very small party and very little experience. I think Netanyahu will be able to eat him for breakfast.
Oh, goodness gracious me. Mitchell, let me come back to you to build on a point which Akiva made, and this is about the handover, effectively, in 18 months' time to Benny Gantz, the alternate Prime Minister, I think he is known as. I must admit, when I first heard this deal, I thought, oh, I don't know that Benny Gantz has got a great deal here. He's been told, oh, sure, 18 months, you can have the job. As I said, 1 year is a long time in Israeli politics. I wonder if he will ever even get the job.
Well, that's a big question. I mean, certainly it's anchored in the coalition agreement, which is anchored in law at this point. So it's very, very difficult to break it. But, you know, I think Yair Lapid, the former partner of Benny Gantz, had threatened that, you know, you can break it with, you know, 70 members of Knesset, I think is the number. There's a number that's above a simple majority of 61. Anything is possible. And Netanyahu, the way that he has worked over the years is he's always buying time. He's buying more time. And somehow he buys more time and it works out in his favor. So he's not even worried about November 2021. He knows that by November 2021, there'll be something else. If it's not, you know, coronavirus, it's coronavirus 3. If it's not, you know, it could be the Iranian nuclear, you know, threat. It could be something from the Palestinian Authority. It could be something from Lebanon. There will be always something which will convince him that he is the only person that can lead Israel, and therefore he will act accordingly. Somewhat of a better deal in that he's gotten a lot of ministries and a lot of very coveted ministries, and it's taken away a lot from the Likud. So whereas Gantz is somewhat of a political novice, we know, because this is really his first time in the Knesset, although it's really his third time in the Knesset, but it's his first year in the Knesset.
But he's going to be the defense minister, isn't he, Mitchell?
To a certain extent within his own party, because Netanyahu did not have enough jobs to give for the boys and the girls, if you will, and he didn't have enough of really important ministries to give. And there was a lot of infighting there, and he's kind of, there's a definite undercurrent of dissent within the Likud, and Gantz has really caused that.
Dalia,
we'll have to see, how that plays out.
Okay, Dalia, let me come back to you then. I'll put the question I was trying to put to Mitchell there, and that is the fact that Benny Gantz will be the defence minister for the first 18 months. Now, defence minister is an important position in Israel, and I wonder how much influence he will have in that role and whether we will see differences in his opinion over what should happen with things that Mitchell mentioned there, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, for example.
I doubt that we will see a significant change of policy. For one thing, defense minister is, of course, an important position, but in many ways, you can look at Israeli history and pinpoint the policy making to the prime minister. We have had prime ministers who have served as defense minister. And I think that Netanyahu, as we all know, is not only a very capable politician, but he's a master controller. And I think that he's very unlikely to actually let Benny Gantz kind of assert any sort of independence in that role. The other major reason why I don't expect to see a huge change is that Benny Gantz has not indicated any definitive differences from Netanyahu when it comes to issues of defense or even with relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, the debate over whether he supports annexation or not is really a matter of centimeters of land, how much Netanyahu actually plans to annex and how much Benny Gantz would accept to be annexed, because Gantz and his party also called for essentially strengthening Israel's big settlement blocks in the West Bank and holding on to the Jordan Valley in some fashion. They were just less clear about it over this time. But of course, the first thing that he was able to agree on with Netanyahu during these coalition negotiations was that they could move forward on this annexation. It was like the first point he basically agreed with on Netanyahu. And I don't expect Netanyahu to go as far as his further right parties would have liked, at least not formally. And I expect Gantz to go further than his supporters would have liked, because his supporters are centrists. Many of them were center left leaning, and they do not support annexation. But Gantz doesn't seem to be particularly committed to the position of his voters. Netanyahu, as we've seen, I think, is willing to negotiate pretty much any principle of policy in order to stay in power. We should remember that the right-wing parties are almost as disappointed as the left-wing parties. At least one particular right-wing party called Yamina, which had sworn, fealty to the right-wing bloc that Netanyahu established, only to be essentially thrown out of the game by Netanyahu when he realized he had to do other political maneuvering. And just to go back to what my colleagues were talking about, Kiva, with relation to whether we can believe that Netanyahu will uphold the deal, and Mitchell also was talking about the law. If Naftali Bennett, the head of that right-wing party who swore loyalty to Netanyahu this whole time, ultimately could not trust Netanyahu, who broke every promise that he'd made to him over the course of the year, it's not clear why a centrist party would have any more reason to trust Netanyahu, or why Netanyahu would display any more loyalty or commitment to the agreement he signed with Benny Gantz.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to see Benny Gantz having a serious influence. Many people think he might not be around in politics beyond one or two cycles. It certainly would be characteristic of centrist parties in Israel not to survive for very long.
Yeah. Akiva, Elder, I'll tell you the picture I'm getting from all of you at the moment it's a very disjointed one. And it actually makes me think that we've got a government here which theoretically represents more of Israel than previous governments has. But at the same time, whilst pleasing everyone, it may actually end up pleasing no one.
There are 36 ministers, all of them Jewish, okay, and very masculine. Not a single Arab, not even a single Druze. But I think that this government reminds me of the Shamir-Peres unity government that was completely paralyzed. They neutralized each other. What this government will have to do now is, first of all, to get over this annexation. And that is very easy, because if you read the coalition agreement, there is a way out of this. If we don't get a green light from the international community, which we will not, it will not happen. Now, I can show the camera also the map, Trump's map, which also requires Israel, if you can see this in the Negev, to swap land. You can see it here, okay, those green points in the Negev.
Yes.
Now, it was not discussed in the coalition agreement and not in the public arena. that according to the Israeli law, in order to swap territories and to give away territories that are under Israeli sovereignty, you need a referendum or at least a special majority. So to me, the whole thing doesn't look very serious. But on the other hand, the Yamina party that Dalia has mentioned, of course, if they will not get what they want, which is jobs in the government, in Israel, there are 1 million people who lost their jobs during the corona, but 35 or 36 people are happy today that they got jobs in the government. But this is the major challenge, of course, is not the corona, because Israel is doing great. Now the number of people who are recovering are higher than the people who are infected. So Israel was doing great on the corona because of the very strict measures that the government took. And now we have to pay the price. And the economic price is huge, with 25% of unemployment, with a huge deficit, and with a lot of people were demonstrating in Tel Aviv now against the government because they lost their jobs.
Right.
And hopefully it will go back, the Israeli economy will recover.
I'm going to interrupt you, Akiva, just because we're just starting to run down the clock, though I must say thank you for bringing your own graphics. We don't get many guests who do that. That's brilliant. Look, final thought I want to get from you is, and it's something which, Dalia, actually, I'll come to you because you did raise this a little bit earlier, the corruption case against Prime Minister Netanyahu. When I actually pull back and think about that, think you're creating a so-called unity government, and in 10 days or less, the man in charge of that is going to go on trial for corruption. It's an extraordinary situation. It's
an extraordinary situation, and I think that Netanyahu can rack up one further achievement in his term as prime minister, which is legitimizing the idea that in a democracy, in a so-called developed democracy, that a prime minister who is not under one count of indictment but 3 indictments will be standing trial while serving as prime minister. Some people think that breaks a sort of ethical code of politics. Other people think it's simply bad for his management capacity, because he will be, as we have been saying in the country all year, going to court in the morning and to the prime minister's residence in the afternoon. But of course, by Israeli law, and the Supreme Court was asked to rule on this with, I should say, putting themselves in grave danger of outrage from the right wing. They have ruled, according to Israeli basic law, that he is under no obligation to resign. And of course, he's even allowed to form the government while under indictment until there is a complete decision in his case, a conviction, if it's a conviction. And that means following any appeals processes. Now, that could drag on for a very long time. And so he's not expected to actually face a final conviction, if he is convicted, of course, while he's even in office.
While he's in office,
I don't expect him.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't expect him to. And I think that we have to understand that that is one of the reasons he's been working so hard to undermine the legitimacy of the judiciary as a sort of insurance policy in case they do go in that direction.
Okay, I've got 30 seconds left. Mitchell, the last word's with you. And I love a prediction. How long till the next Israeli election?
I don't know.
Come on.
I mean, that's too hard. The only prediction that I can make is that, maybe Dalia has more insight on this. People are not satisfied. I mean, it's not just that they're not satisfied with this government, which would be a perfect Jewish government, because Jews are never satisfied. So if no one was satisfied, it'd be great. But the reason they're not satisfied is because it seems that they are out of touch with what's going on.
Right.
You spent this time, Israel under Netanyahu, 3.5% employment. Until this month, it's 30% employment. And the economy, coronavirus, none of this was debated during the coalition agreement. It was all annexation, which has nothing to do with coronavirus. In fact, the Palestinians are working very nicely with the Israelis on this issue. And, judges and rotation. So, it was a great idea to have this coronavirus and get a unity government together. But the real issues that they need to tackle, I think, are not being tackled, because they haven't been tackled up until now.
Up until now, have they? Mitchell Barak, Dalia Scheindlin, Akiva Elder, thank you to all 3 of you. I know we're going to be talking about this again in the months to come. Thank you for joining us. And of course, thank you for watching. Plenty of ways to continue the conversation if you'd like. We're online in the shows section at aljazeera.com. We are also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And on Twitter, it's at AJ Inside Story or at Kamal AJE if you want to tweet or message me directly. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole Inside Story team. Thanks for joining us. We will see you again soon.